Lord, as we begin deliberation and asking for policy strengthening infrastructure, human infrastructure, and our physical infrastructure for our lives. Let us work well together. Let us deliberate. Let us be open. Let us deconstruct. Let us always remember that it is about providing fair and just opportunities for all of us. Help us to others to help each other in knowing and understanding and support.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice Speaker, if you can lead us in the recitation of the Unifresi.
Thank you. Che nel mastakolo di Kinesoko, che mastakolo di Kodoston, che nel masfigo nel Mechnyahu, who praise in Maizu, paragrafo Kehi, che ne difendi I Hinenki, I Kultura, I Linguahi, I Aivi, I Hamda, I Tanatamoro, I Insatsu Direto, che ne Nastu Stata, Testi Wafid Mekihilu Biblia, che ne Vendirahu, Vendiri Wahama.
And if Senator Tony Ada, you can help lead us in singing the Guam hymn, and Senator Tom Ada in the singing of the national anthem. Thank you very much. The clerks can take roll call.
Senator Tom Ada. Senator Tony Ada. Senator Uggan. Vice Speaker Cruz. Senator Duenas. Senator Limtiaco. Senator McCready. Senator Morrison. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Rodriguez. Senator St. Speaker Wampat. Senator Yamashita. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and colleague. Good afternoon. Madam Speaker, I move that we approve the legislative journal dated November 26, 2013, subject to correction.
On a motion without any objections, can we excuse Senator Uggan?
I move that Senator Evan be excused for the beginning of this session. He should be back in time for us to vote, if not
Thank you
sooner.
very much. On that motion without any objections, ordered.
Thank you. I move that there are communications and petitions and that they be printed in today's session journal.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
And there are messages from Imagalan Guahan, and I move that they be printed in today's session journal.
No objections, so ordered.
And there are reports of standing committees, and I also move that they be printed in today's session journal.
No objections, so ordered.
Okay, there are no reports of select committees. Under item 12, I move that bill number 228-32LS, as well as bill numbers 229-32COR to bill number 268-32COR, resolution number 278-32LS, resolution number 279-32COR through resolution numbers 309-32COR, certificate number 82-32LS through certificate number 83-82LS, as well as certificate number 84-32COR through certificate number 103-32, all be given its first reading.
Hearing objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, under motions, any resolution that's commendatory or condolence in nature that's introduced for the duration of this regular session, I move that it be adopted and that all senators be co-sponsors and the sponsor works with the clerk and our legal counsel in the preparation of these documents.
On the motion without any objections, so ordered.
And Madam Speaker, as you indicated, we continue to have a very aggressive session agenda. So if in the event we get to an item on the second reading file and the sponsor may need more time or that some information is still pending or that some concerns have yet to be addressed and the sponsor agrees, Madam Speaker, I move that these bills be set aside, and then once the sponsor indicates that they're available and ready to proceed, that they be allowed to do so. And you've always been able to use this as a mechanism to manage our agenda so that we're not sitting around waiting when we could be doing other stuff. So I move that that same thing be applied in this
Thank
session.
you. On that motion without any objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, if you look at the session agenda, this request was made after the Committee on Rules had already adopted the agenda, but under, I believe it's Bill 250, Bill 251 and Bill 252, and these are relative to the waiver of sovereign immunity on a loan previously authorized, one for the legislature and one for the Jose D. Leon Guerrero Port Authority of Guam. I move that this be the top two items on the agenda. That the agenda reordered to bring these two
So on
items
the
up.
motion without any objections, so ordered.
And Madam Speaker, I believe under motions, there's a possible override attempt for bill number 205-32, and so I yield to the sponsor of bill 205-32, who is Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. So we are on motions. The author of vetoed bill number 205-32, that would be Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much to our Majority Leader. Madam Speaker,
Your motion to...
place this over,
Notwithstanding
notwithstanding
the governor's
motion, the
objection.
Governor's objection, like to place veto Bill 205, the third reading, and be allowed to briefly explain the reasons for this override attempt.
Okay, you may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 205 was an act to add a new Article 6 to Chapter 77, Division 2 of Title 12, Guam Code Annotated. This was basically relative to promoting economic development by authorizing the issuance of tax credit to entities who assist with the development of Guam's agriculture and Guam products subproducts export initiative through contributions to offset shipping. What this is, Madam Speaker and colleagues, was an initiative to spark our export industry here on island. with our agricultural products and other products that are made on Guam. We've worked very hard with GITA, as well as other stakeholders, to see how we can put this initiative together. And we've known for a very long time, Madam Speaker, that we have products on Guam, we have agriculture products and other products that are made here that are very valuable and could be very well received in foreign countries, specifically Asian countries. But the biggest problem we've seen in the trade shows that GITA participates in is the fact that the shipping from Guam to these Asian countries is a very big impediment. It doesn't, when you factor in the shipping, it doesn't make our products, it doesn't make it viable then because of the addition of the shipping cost. And so we've looked at ways to see how we can provide some assistance, and working with GITA, working with the shipping companies, we said if we had some mechanism in place that would provide tax credits to offset the cost of shipping, that perhaps then we could spark this export industry and help our local farmers who came out during the public hearing and other really small business owners, Madam Speaker, that are really working hard to develop their products here and have really good quality products. But this here would have helped in making sure that that impediment, which is the shipping cost, is reduced. There was one issue in this legislation that the governor objected to, was that we've added an option for GITA to also provide income tax credits. The bill initially, we worked in getting business privilege tax credits for the shippers that would participate in this program. In our zeal and a passion to really get this ball rolling, because we knew we put some limits on the amount of BPT that is allowed to be offset, we've included a language that GITA would have the authority as well to issue income tax credits for these shippers. Unfortunately, we got a response back from the governor that this may be, or this, to his opinion, is inorganic and would not have been legally available for GITA to do. Just like in any other legislation we have, we put the severability clause. And so, I was hoping that if that one section was not enforceable or could not move forward, that the other parts of this legislation could have moved forward. And so from the time that this bill was vetoed to now, I believe we've lost some good opportunity to really get the ball rolling in our export industry. And so I'm hoping that, notwithstanding the governor's objections, that my colleagues would see this not really as a way to as I've heard some of my colleagues say, to go against, this veto, to go against what the governor's will is, but really is to get this program moving and to get our people, or really a small business community, to get them started, to get their products sold off-island, especially in Asian countries. And so I asked my colleagues to really take a look at this. I thank them for their participation when we were deliberating this bill in session. I thank a lot of them too who have signed up as co-sponsors. And to see really the fastest way we can do this, Madam Speaker, is that we overwrite this bill, and that the severability clause would then protect us from being in violation or being in violation of the Organic Act or breaching any provisions thereof. And so finally, if you look at that section that the governor has referenced, it's going to be up to GITA. It's going to be up to one of his agencies under his purview to authorize and issue these tax credits. And so if indeed this is the policy, this is the policy that we can't issue income tax credits, then they simply don't have to enforce that section. However, all the other sections should be enforceable and should be allowed to move forward. And so again, Madam Speaker, I ask our colleagues to please support this override. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that motion, then, notwithstanding the objections of the governor to send vetoed Bill 205 to the voting file, no objections? So I understand that under motions, Speaker Pangilinan, under motions? For, no, the 205 went down to the voting file. Yes, that's why I'm addressing you. Speaker Ben. So I'm calling you on vetoed bill 223. Oh. Down already on voting file. Okay, so on 223? No. Yes, no. Yes, okay.
Thank you very much. Citizens citizen buenas iminaw ni kataluan ni para hobus Madam Speaker dan todo lo kuy manggagi guni pa guna og taluan ni manay kungup manggagi talu guni no ni para tatsogi che tsui tauto ni para fan fina maulik ja uno no Madam Speaker no na jao pa gu muevi gini na patti gi tariata I jao na muevi na no masaya ti conformi governo ni STE Bill 223 za veto line item veto za ribaha isalakti ni poro managwaha poro fama posisya ilanceros ni ezi manin afekta ni STE disaster ni mapus na unsab za na mumuebil na no tapega na aktu I 223 papagi voting file za considera override I action ni gobyerno. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that notwithstanding the objections of the Governor, Bill number 223, line item veto of the Governor in Bill 223 be overridden. And I'd like to, once again, Madam Speaker, when everyone was trying to assist the farmers in the disaster that they faced, we all felt that there was a need to assist the farmers, that the urgency was there, that although the farmers had suffered the damages and were struggling, that months had gone on before the administration responded to their needs. And seeing that the administration was very slow in moving in providing the resources to the farmers, that even though they issued executive order, they issued disaster declaration, they weren't doing anything to move to actually put assistance into the hands of the farmers so they could begin the recovery efforts that they suffered during the natural disaster of inclement weather and severe weather that we had experienced in our community. And so, of course, I introduced the bill that would provide the farmers with the resources necessary to do so. And so we were moving forward on the bill, and of course, everybody else wanted to assist the farmers even more than what was originally proposed in the bill that I had introduced. And I would gladly accept the additional assistance that the farmers would merit in order to ensure that when the time is there, that the need and the resources are going to be there. And so, Madam Speaker, my good colleagues here, although they tried to and wanted to substitute and keep assistance to the farmers below the amount that the farmers needed by removing the appropriation I had offered and substituting their appropriation, in the end, they also, my colleagues, decided that rather than reducing the appropriation, we're just going to increase it and add on to it. Well, of course, Madam Speaker, we passed the bill overwhelmingly without any objections, maybe some reservations, but certainly nobody said we don't want to do this. Nobody voted no. Nobody said we don't have to. Nobody said it's too much money. As a matter of fact, everybody said it's not enough money. And then what of course occurred is the bill goes to the governor and he line item vetoes it. But ironically, Madam Speaker, he didn't line item veto the portion of the bill that was originally introduced, which was, of course, the figure I provided for and the resources I had provided for in the original bill. He decided that rather than passing that, he passed what my colleagues have presented as the alternative funding source and line item vetoed what was originally in the bill that had been proposed. And so what occurred, Madam Speaker, of course, is the farmers are applying. We're finding out that, in effect, there's not going to be enough money. And that we just saw what happened with 7 inches of rain right now in this last 5 days in our community, and what that destruction is going to do. As a matter of fact, everybody said when they added the money rather than reducing it, saying it's not going to be the last disaster that these farmers are going to face, so we might as well put the money in there, and if they don't use it, they don't use it, and if something else comes along, then they have it readily available. Well, of course, from what we've been able to tell and the way we've been able to calculate it out, there is no more additional money available to the farmers after the line item vetoed by the governor. So what we need to do is replenish that fund. And so an override of the line item veto would add additional money to the farmers' compensation program, damage program, in order to ensure that, if anything, when we find out that this last 5 days of 7 inches of rain have washed away all the plantings and all the seeds, and the farmers once again, it's just, that's the nature and the risk of farming. And this is the value that we place on our farmers who struggle every single day and every single season to try and put fresh fruits and vegetables on our tables. And so, Madam Speaker, I would like to ask my colleagues, in the spirit that everyone had cooperated in adding the additional money to the farmers, that we put that money back. Either we were serious that we wanted to help the farmers, or we weren't serious and we were playing politics, Madam Speaker. But it was very clear that at that time, everyone said, all right, we're going to increase the amount, not decrease it. And what happened? The governor decreased it. So are we still true to our commitment to the farmers that we're going to give them the amount that this body had passed, and that the reduction by the governor of the amount available to the compensation program at the Department of Agriculture to our local farmers will be restored, and the money will be made available should the governor again declare a storm disaster that would allow us to assist our farmers, Madam Speaker. And if you go, you talk to agriculture and they'll say, oh, we have more than enough money. The next day, we don't have enough money. We don't know where we're at, Madam Speaker, and we really can't even track all these down. The farmers are not being paid, or they were paid 50%, but if they brought in and found their receipts, they could get the additional 50%. But once they do that, there's no more money available. Again, Madam Speaker, what this does is it provides and puts the resources that this body felt was necessary in order to ensure that the assistance to our farmers is there when they need it. And right now, we know that they still need the assistance, that compensation can still be filed, and that payments can still be made, but we don't have the requisite appropriation at this time from what we've been able to gather in terms of what was actually paid out and what was claimed. And so it is necessary to restore that funding which the governor reduced and took away from our farmers with his line item veto. So, Madam Speaker, I'm appealing to all of my colleagues to continue to demonstrate your support to the farmers by supporting this override and restoring the resources that will be made available to our farmers to help them in their recovery from the severe weather damage that they've incurred. And anything in the future, this money will become available immediately, and we don't have to come back in, pass a new bill. The governor doesn't have to say, I don't have enough money. The appropriation's there, it gets spent. If it's needed, it's available immediately. So all the elements are in place. And that, Madam Speaker, is my plea to this body on behalf of our farmers. Zamala datan na siguro na taajuda ilan sa ruta siya guhudin sa siya lo kuy umajujuday gini ni paronayat ni inengkano ni maulik para familiakta dan famagonta da parajuda ni tafan maulik isaluta. Situs masi, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. Notwithstanding the objections of the governor and vetoed Bill 223, Senator Respicio, you'd like to speak on that motion?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of this override attempt. I want to acknowledge Speaker Ben for his persistence in wanting to get to the bottom of the crop damage program, which he had established many legislatures ago together with former Vice Speaker Ted Nelson and others. Madam Speaker, the crop damage program that we have on the books is certainly designed to provide immediate relief to our farmers. And when we first experienced all this heavy downpour of rain, I've asked the governor to declare emergency so that he can immediately release all the funds that are necessary pursuant to this crop damage compensation program so that the farmers can go out and buy the seeds that they need in order to have the activity that they have in terms of producing the crop. And so this has been one big disappointment after the other, Madam Speaker and colleagues. If you recall the roundtable meeting that we had with the Department of Agriculture and how the application of this law has been extremely inconsistent, where in one instance they said that if the farmer provides the affidavit that they'll go along with the affidavit that they would sign under penalty of perjury, that this is what they use to purchase the seeds and what they use in terms of their crops so that they can be adequately compensated and they can be able to get this assistance and move forward. So it went from we would accept the affidavits to they have to provide actual receipts. And then it went from we're going to accept the actual receipts to we can now accept affidavits. And so this constant back and forth in the misapplication of this law is what caused all our farmers to be extremely upset and disappointed with this government. Another aspect of what caused our farmers to be extremely disappointed and upset with this government, Madam Speaker and colleagues, is the actual funding that was necessary to implement this program. First, we had the agriculture director say that she didn't have any money. And if the legislature appropriated the money, they would move forward with the program. Then when Speaker Ben introduced Bill 223-32, and the agriculture and administration said, well, once the funds are identified, then we can be able to implement the program. And then as we heard from the retiring speaker, how when we were in session, that amount was increased to $790,000, only to find that it was item vetoed by the governor by $340,000. And so at the same time, you had the director saying that we didn't have enough money and we need more money, and she welcomed additional appropriation. The other side of the equation, which is the front office, they saw fit to reduce the appropriation down. And so, Madam Speaker, what I did is I did a Freedom of Information Act request asking the Director of Agriculture to provide me with the manner in which they implemented this program pursuant to the statute that provides for crop damage assistance. When the director responded to the FOIA request, I was a little bit perplexed to find that it seemed like agriculture implemented this using some other mechanism instead of the mechanism contained in 64A Title V of GCA, which is the Crop Damage Compensation Program. So I responded to her asking for more detail, and she has yet to provide that information. And I did this more so a couple of days ago, given the current inclement weather that we were experiencing and trying to have this government be proactive. And so the retiring speaker is absolutely correct. We're going to continue to have a situation where the heavy rain is going to cause our farmers this kind of situation where they're going to have to provide some relief by this government, and it's going to have to be provided by consistent application of statute as well as identifying the funding sources in order to carry out these statutes. And so I think moving forward on the override certainly is prudent, it's necessary, and so that if in the event the Department of Agriculture has to do this all over again, funding will not be an issue, and we will continue to work with agriculture to see why is it that they're not applying this statute consistently, and we could do whatever we can to the certain extent that we have to provide those kinds of guidances. And so I rise in full support of this override attempt. It passed unanimously by this body, and so certainly the override should be sustained if our actions are going to be consistent with wanting to provide this kind of assistance that we need to provide for our local farmers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion? There being none, so on the motion then to send vetoed bill 223, of course, notwithstanding the objections of the governor, to the voting file without any objections, so ordered. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized on Bill 251. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I'm sorry, Senator, but you're on the top of the list.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and colleagues. Under legislative concurrences, from your Committee on Education, Public Library, Women's Affairs, on the nomination of Mrs. Rosa S. Palomo to serve as a retired teacher member of the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council for a term of 3 years, with the recommendation of to do confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
No objections, so ordered.
From the Vice Speaker's Committee on General Government Operations and Cultural Affairs, on the nomination of Donna Kloppenberg to serve as a performing artist member of the Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency, with Vice Speaker Cruz's committee's recommendation to confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
From Senator Tom Atta's Committee on Public Safety, Infrastructure, and Maritime Transportation, on the nomination of Mr. Tim Kernahan to serve as a member of the Jose D. Leon Gura Commercial Port Authority of Guam's Board of Directors for a term commencing on the date of his confirmation expiring June 30th, 2016, to fill the seat left vacated by Mr. Daniel J. Tarinco, whose term expired June 30, 2013, with Senator Tom Atta's committee's recommendation to do confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
From Senator Rodriguez's Committee on Health and Human Services, Health Insurance Reform, Economic Development, and Senior Citizens, on the appointment of Mr. Theodore M. Lewis to serve as a member of the GMH Authority Board of Trustees, with his committee's recommendation to confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Also from the same committee, on the appointment of Ms. Hope Pangilinan to serve as a member of the Guam Board of Social Work, with Senator Rodriguez's committee's recommendation to confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Also from the same committee, on the nomination of Ms. Melissa Chargalov to be on the same board, and who will serve as a member for the discipline, with Senator Rodriguez's committee's recommendation to do confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
No objections, so ordered.
From the Senator Mike Nicholas's Committee on Aviation, Ground Transportation, Regulatory Concerns, and Future Generations, on the nomination of Mr. Franklin P. Leongoro to serve as a member of the ABC Alcoholic Beverage Control Board for a term of 2 years, beginning from July 1st, 2013 until June 30th, 2015, with Senator Nicholas's committee's recommendation to do confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
From the same committee, on the nomination of Ms. Ginger Porter to serve as a member of the Guam Regional Transit Authority Board of Directors for a term of 4 years, with Senator Nicholas's committee's recommendation to do confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
From my committee on Rules, Federal, Foreign, and Micronesian Affairs, Human and Natural Resources, and Election Reform, on the appointment of Mr. Erning Victor Zhao to serve as a member of the EPA Board for a term of 3 years as defined by Title 10 GCA Chapter 45103, beginning January 27, 2014, with my committee's recommendation to do confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
From the same committee, on the nomination of Mr. William Nault to the same board for the same terms, I move that be placed in the voting file. The recommendation to confirm.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
And number 11, from the same committee, on the nomination of Van Ralph to the same board, EPA, for the same terms, I move that that be placed in the voting file with the committee's recommendation to do confirm.
No objection, so ordered.
And then from the same committee, on the nomination of Attorney Terrence M. Brooks to serve on the same board for the same terms, with the committee's recommendation to confirm, I move that be placed in the voting file.
No objection, so ordered.
And from Speaker Ben's Committee on Appropriations, Public Debt, Legal Affairs, Retirement, Public Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, and Land, on the nomination of Dr. Marilyn C. Salas to serve as the Chamorro Culture Representative on the Guam Historic Preservation Review Board for a term of 4 years defined by Chapter 76, Section 7650921 GCA, for a term beginning March 21st, 2013 to March 20th, 2017, with Speaker Ben Paninan's committee's recommendation to confirm. I move that be placed in the voting file.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. So now we're on the second reading file, and based on a motion to place Bills 251 and 252 in the top of the agenda, the chair recognizes Senator Rodriguez on Bill 251. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill 251-32 in the third reading. Be allowed to speak.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you very much again, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon again, colleagues. Madam Speaker, Bill 251 is an act to amend Public Law 3267 relative to the waiver of sovereign immunity on a loan previously authorized for the Guam Legislature. And this, Madam Speaker, is similar to legislation that we entertained about a week ago for a loan that was authorized and moving forward for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. What this does, Madam Speaker, is that it satisfies a requirement of the lender, in this case the Bank of Guam, in that should the government, in this case the Guam Legislature, in this loan, the government fail in its obligation to make good on its agreement, which is the loan, then they will be able to take the government to court and sue the government, and also collect any attorney's fees and any related costs in that suit to recover what is owed. And so we know that before things move forward in the hospital's loan, this was needed. And after this was passed by this body, it still had to undergo several other layers of checks by the appropriate the appropriate legal representations from the hospital, and then the AG's office, and then finally, as it moves forward, it'll go to the governor for eventual signature. And so what this does, Madam Speaker, is again remove that impediment that has caused this loan to really be in a standstill now. And so after this is passed, we look forward to this moving forward, and the legislature building start the work of rebuilding and renovating. So again, I ask my colleagues for their support in this.
On the motion, Senator Duenas.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to rise in full support of Bill 251, COR. Madam Speaker, I have to, first of all, thank the chairman for inviting me to be a co-sponsor on this bill. And I have to say that for this purpose and a subsequent bill that will be discussed, but specifically for this purpose, I want to reiterate that it was very humbling and very touching, I guess, to say, when the public hearing was heard on this issue, to have 4 speakers in the hall to support the measure and to really bring about the true nature of which we're moving in Aganya to the restoration of the building, the museum coming online, and all of those items. And this has to happen now to really consummate that agreement. I rise also just to make note of the fact that we had a very spirited debate several days ago, and now the Guam Memorial Hospital is putting forth the information that the loan is going through, and they're going to take care of a lot of their obligations, which is very good, and even vendors are being a little bit gracious. It was brought up on the floor during that very spirited debate that perhaps maybe attorneys and others would come out to object to or support the fact that they may have bid, other things may have happened with other companies. Had that happened? Yeah, Madam Speaker, during the public hearing, none of that happened. So I would just like to say, Madam Speaker, that in the spirit of this bill, and of course the subsequent bill to come, and the experience that we had in the following public hearings, I was happy to see that many of the concerns that were brought about with a similar measure with the hospital were simply just not realized. And that because of the fact that the bank requiring what the hospital required for the bill is the same requirement here, and will be the same requirement for the issue surrounding the much-needed Port Authority funding. So for the record, I just wanted to make sure that at least we understood that as the bank requiring this, this is something that was needed and is needed now for these other bills, and I look forward to the day when the ground is broken on that beautiful plan, and of course for the ribbon cutting. Thank you, Madam Speaker, to rise in support of Bill 251.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of the overriding intent of Bill 251, which seeks to provide protections to the lender with respect to the loan that they're going to be authorizing, so that in the event that we don't make good on that loan obligation, they're going to be able to recover their attorney's costs if they have to. I fully want to support that, and I rise in order to do so. There's just one section here, some additional language that I'm concerned with, and I was also concerned with it in the previous bill that we discussed several days ago that was referred to by the retiring speaker. There's a lot of language in this bill that makes sure that the lender is protected, and that's the intent of what we're trying to achieve here. There's just some extra language in here that when I read it, I'm just concerned that it kind of is overreaching, in that it may open the door for lawsuits relative to the loan, but unrelated to the protections of the lender. And I just want to make sure that we tighten up that language so that we're clear that we're providing this bill in order to protect the lender. The lender's been very gracious in working with the government of Guam, and we want to make sure that we're meeting that grace with our own grace. But at the same time, too, there's just some language that's a little overreaching, and I would like to reference it on page 1, lines 10 through 12. All of the language previous to those, to what I'm about to reference, provides a very good amount of coverage for the lender. But the additional language here, after the word hereby, it reads, or in connection with the enforcement of any agreement, note, or pledge that arises directly from the indebtedness authorized hereby. Now, I know that it's a little difficult to follow, but the way I read that language and the door that I see that's open to interpretation is, let's say we pass the bill and the loan is authorized to the government, and those monies, that's the indebtedness that was authorized. So that loan is now authorized. And let's say that that money is then used to procure services. And as a result of that indebtedness that we authorized, that very money that was authorized, if there's any other legal questions that need to be remedied in the courts, any other attorney's costs that get dragged into this based on a procurement dispute, somebody suing because they weren't satisfied, or somebody suing because they felt that they weren't being treated fairly, or even in this case, if we authorize that very same language, somebody suing just for the sake of suing. Because it's relative to the indebtedness that we're authorizing, it's relative to that money that we're making available, I'm just a little worried that that extra language opens the door for any other lawsuit expenses to be covered because it's related to that money that we've authorized. And so I think that if we put a period after the word hereby and then strike everything else afterwards from lines 10 to 12, I think that we would still provide the adequate protections that we need for the lender, and we would close that door from that possibility of us saying we're going to cover all attorneys' expenses for anything related to any of this money. That's kind of how I read that language. I think it opens the door a little too wide. And I think that if we put a period after that word hereby, we'll still make sure the lender is protected, but we won't be opening the door too wide for us to be covering every other legal expense that may be related to any of this money whatsoever. So at this time, I'd like to proffer an amendment on page 1, lines 10 through 12, to put a period after the word hereby, and to strike all the language starting with the word or and ending with the final hereby on line 12.
On the amendment, which is page 1, on lines 10 to 12, is to put a period after thereby and then delete the rest.
After the word hereby on line 10.
Yes, on line 10, and put a period after. Yes, period. Then the rest to delete. So, Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, when we were addressing the GMH issue, the same concern that we have here with the waiver of sovereign immunity, you know, we worked very closely with all involved. And, you know, I understand the retiring speaker's concerns about the what-ifs, right? However, I'm going to be, you know, I think we need to be very cautious in how we move forward in this, because if you take a look at this section, this is existing language that was already passed by this body in the first authorization of this loan. And even at that point, we know that a lot of work went into it, you know, by members here, the attorneys that were involved. And so to make any changes here now to something that we've already established, I think is, you know, will be problematic for this process to move forward. And that's my concern, is for this process to, you know, to be held up once again. On the issue and the concern of, you know, suits, you know, any lawsuits that may come forward from procurement or from, you know, I don't know, you know, what was said, but from anything else, you know, I think it's very clear that that if any suit is to be brought forward, and the waiver of sovereign immunity, which now includes attorney's costs, would be limited to just that agreement, which is the loan, which is, I believe, the was it $4 million loan for the Guam Legislature. And so, you know, I would, you know, object to this amendment based on those observations, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
On the amendment, Senator Duenas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too, as well as a co-sponsor on this bill, and for the arguments stated by the author and main sponsor, support the objection. Once again, the public hearing, which was even stated for the purposes of the GMH bill, which is the same waiver, the discussion that there would be possible legal input, possible vendors changing their minds and wanting to bid because of the changes, that was very publicly debated, Madam Speaker. And not one attorney, not one potential vendor, not one of notable protesters and procurement experts showed up to testify. Now, maybe if the GMH measure wasn't so public and wasn't debated so heavily, it could have slipped somebody's mind or not gotten on the radar of those in our legal community and those who otherwise would be interested in procurement matters, particularly, Madam Speaker, when it comes to lending. This is our local lending institution. This is our local bank. This is buy local. And I think when those institutions who have professional staff, who have a history in lawmaking, who have a history in lending and holding billions of dollars in assets. Pretty straightforward stuff. So once again, Madam Speaker, I rise as well to join the main sponsor of this bill in objecting to removing the balance of the provision that is contained here in Bill 251. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the amendment, there is an objection. Okay, Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly rise in support of the amendment, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, this whole process is a process that is a negotiation. And it is clear that the negotiation resulted in a policy call that I, as a member of this body charged with ensuring and protecting the public interest, feel was inadequate. That it's clearly evident that what they want is what they want. It's not a matter of, it's a requirement of law. It's a the matter is that that's how they feel they can protect themselves the best. And does the amendment that was proposed by Senator from Dedido, does the amendment protect the public interest better than what is being asked of us in the way that the bill's drafted? I believe it does. I believe it improves the protection of the public interest by putting that period at the end, confining our limitations and liabilities to the loan itself and not making it open-ended. It's in our best interest to do so. And so that really is the only question. Are we interested in moving forward? That, in my opinion, does not provide the best protection we can offer. Will the bank walk away from the loan? I don't believe they will. I believe that that period there continues to provide them with a measure of protection that would meet their responsibilities to their shareholders. And I believe that putting that period at the word end by, of the word hereby protects my responsibility to the public interest and the shareholders of the government of Guam, the people of Guam. And so I don't believe that this is a deal breaker. I don't believe that it changes what is the intent and what we are willing to do in the amendment of sovereign immunity. We used to be able to just put sovereign immunity, period. And there was no need to indemnify them against attorney's fees and so forth. We've been able to get loans like that. So why are we retreating in this instance from that policy which we've been able to implement that has protected the public interest? And again, I don't believe it's a deal breaker. I don't believe it changes the security that the bank has with regards to implementing its rights under the terms of the law and recouping the costs associated when it exercises those rights. But it still provides a measure of protection for the general public and the people of Guam and the public resources, Madam Speaker. So I feel very comfortable that it does not change it, that there's no need for this issue that, nobody objected. I think if we're going to do these kind of things, if we're going to change the protections that we give our vendors, we should make sure that when we issue the RFP at the very beginning, that we notify everybody who may have an interest in bidding that these protections are going to be afforded to them. And that way, I think it levels the playing field. Everybody understands. Instead of we put it out with one set of criteria, and we come back under the negotiation process and change the criteria. I think that it would be fair, it would be a better way of doing business if we were totally upfront with everybody that may have an interest in doing business with the government, and have them start from the same place. This evolution of these kind of sovereign immunity provisions, I think, for me, it's just a little uncomfortable that it becomes after the fact. Whether or not anybody protests or not, whether or not anybody came down and said, hey, I would have bid if I'd known that, I just think that it's just not fair. It's as simple as that. It's just not fair to give something after the fact when somebody else never knew he had the ability to get that thing if he had bid or not. And so, once again, Madam Speaker, I think that the bank will not have its rights curtailed by this amendment, that they will continue to have the legal authority to exercise their rights under the loan agreement, and the public will continue to ensure that we protect their interests and capping and not making it so open-ended that we really can't calculate or even fathom what else could be out there. And so I think that this is a reasonable change that doesn't go beyond changing the scope or the spirit of what was negotiated, and everybody continues then to have the ability to meet their responsibility through their specific constituency. In this case, for me, it's the public interest and the people of Guam. Thank you, and sit this Muslim.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? I'm going to ask the author if you'd like to close. The mover of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, I fully support the intent, the overriding intent of this bill to make sure that the lender is afforded a greater level of security when moving forward with this loan. We ask for people who have backgrounds or expertise in these areas. For what it's worth, I'm a former banker. And with respect to all the other language that we're leaving in here, I really do feel that it's very, very thorough in making sure the lender is protected. My only concern is shared with the retiring speaker is I just don't want us to be going a little too far and overstepping the protections that we're seeking to afford the lender by kind of opening the door for us to say, hey, any lawsuit whatsoever related to this money, we're going to cover those attorney costs too. And that's kind of how I read this language. I read it that if there's going to be any kind of legal challenge with respect to this money that we're making available through this loan, we're going to be on the hook for all of those legal expenses. And we do want to make sure the lender is protected. That's part of us being gracious again in return for the grace that we're getting for the really great terms that we're getting for this loan from the lender. I just don't want us to overstep it and to open the door for lawsuits coming from all over the place with respect to this money. And I really think that if we put a period after that word hereby, we're going to continue to maintain the protections to the lender that we're seeking to maintain. And if we strike all the language after that all the way to the end of line 12, we will take off the table the likelihood that there's going to be all kinds of lawsuits coming from all over the place with respect to the money that's unrelated to the loan itself. So I'd like to ask my colleagues to please consider this amendment. I don't think that it's going to be problematic in moving forward the projects that we need to move forward with this bill. And I'd like to thank the author and the co-sponsor for taking us this far. It is going to help the people of Guam. And I just want to make sure that in our intent to help them, we're not going to overreach and create an even greater legal liability that's going to end up costing our people. So I would like for us to please consider this amendment wholeheartedly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. There is an objection, so I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of the St. Nicholas amendment. All in favor, please raise your hand. Sorry, I didn't meet the required number, so the amendment failed. On the main motion, does anybody else would like to speak?
If I may, I did have another subsequent amendment.
Oh, okay. So So Senator San Nicolas, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In light of this amendment not going through, I would like to at least try and afford a degree of protection by striking the word "or" on line 10. I think the word "or" kind of opens the door for a dual interpretation of this. If we strike the word "or," then it ties it all together, and it still ties everything in with the lender. So, the nuances of the word "and" or the exclusion of either of those words altogether, I think will still, to at least a certain degree, afford us that kind of protection. So I would like for us to consider an amendment on page 1, line 10, striking the word "or" after the word "hereby."
On the amendment, any objections? No objections, so ordered. On the main motion, any other speakers? Would you like to close, Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to our colleagues for their participation. Madam Speaker, in closing, I think I failed to mention in my opening is that the reason why we're here today in addressing this is because this government reversed its position on this. The reason why we're here today is we saw a memo from the Attorney General's office to the lender informing them that the language that we've been using on waiver of sovereign immunity is now changed. They don't now cover attorney's fees or related costs. It was the position of the Attorney General several years ago with the language that we had in the books that waiver of sovereign immunity included attorney's fees and related costs. And so really it's not it's not for want of us advancing the desires or wants of this generous lender that we all talk about. It's really here. We're here because the government has reversed its position, and so I'm happy that we're all able to support this, so that what we've previously supported and authorized to move forward, in this case the Guam Legislature's rebuilding, could move forward. So again, I thank my colleagues, for their support and participation, and ask them to please support this measure. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senators. On the motion then to send Bill 251 to third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Bill number 252, Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill 252-32 on the third reading.
And you want to speak?
Yes, ma'am.
May proceed.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, this again is very similar to, or it is similar to Bill 251 and also Bill 250, the former Bill 250, which again is including attorney's fees and related costs to waiver of sovereign immunity. I won't take up too much time again to explain, but just as we explained for the previous bill, this bill now would do just that, but in this case for the Jose D. Leon Guerrero Port Authority of Guam loan. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I expected you to do the exact same thing. Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, again, I rise in full support of the intent of this legislation. I thank the author and the co-sponsors for trying to move our community forward with it. Again, just to make sure that we're not, having any kind of misinterpretations here. On page 1, line 10, I would like to make a motion for us to strike the word "or."
Okay. On the amendment, no objections, so ordered. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very good. So on the motion then to send Bill 252 to third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Bill number 15, Senator Muñoz-Barnes, you recognize.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move Bill number 15-32, COR, is introduced by myself to the third reading, and I'd like to speak on it.
You may continue.
Madam Speaker, Bill number 15-32 is an act to rezone Lot 3, Tract 1942 in the municipality of Barrigada from a single-family dwelling, R1, to a multiple-family dwelling, R2. This was at the request of Mr. Robert Cruz, who is the owner of the property. His house, Madam Speaker, has 2 stories. And when he was trying to build an addition to the property, he went and got the permits for adding a section to add on to his house. And what happened was he was informed by the bank that he was not conforming to the laws that exist today. And I do know that when Mr. Cruz had asked to work with the agencies, there was a concern in the past regarding the possibility of building additional structure to the house, that there may be water problems. So at that time, Mr. Cruz was working with the government agencies. There was a major concern with the water pressure. As some of you may know, this facility, or this house is located near and around the Sagan Bonita area, the subdivision there. On December 3rd, the Department of Land Management, through its acting director, Mr. David Camacho, did send a letter to our office sharing with us a point of clarification relative to an earlier comment that was made by their office on this Bill 15-32. And he said, in our letter, we noted confidence that adequate water pressure exists in the immediate area. We reiterate our position based on the fact that since 1993, residential sprawl has matured in the immediate area, inclusive of the newly developed Sagan Bonita subdivision. Notwithstanding opposing access points between Slot 3 and the Sagan Bonita development area, we understand that water resource assessments as provided by the appropriate agencies are of much a larger and comprehensive scale, as the connectivity of such resources, thus availability and adequacy, appears singular per each municipality. In other words, an allowance in the residential development suggests water resources are adequate and available for the immediate area. If water resource becomes limited or inadequate, such entities would be more than likely take action such as placing a moratorium on a development in the area until appropriate resources becomes available. And Mr. Camacho notes that we hope this information serves useful in your assessment of Bill 15-32 and remain available to provide further assistance. And Madam Speaker, that was one of the obstacles that Mr. Cruz and his family had to work with, and having this update coming from the Department of Land Management, working closely with GWA, that concern has been addressed. I hope my colleagues will help me support Mr. Cruz in this effort. When asked during the public hearing why he wasn't conforming, he said when he was building the second floor, there was already a meter in that area. But now that he wants to add an additional to that second floor, the banks have shared with him that it was non-conforming. So this is the route that he's been taking. He's attempted this on a couple of occasions, and now that we've received this latest information from Department of Land Management, I hope my colleagues will support this effort. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of moving this rezoning from an R1 to a multi-purpose family housing. Senator Masi.
Okay. On the motion, Senator Duane is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. To rise, actually, to ask a question of the author, if she would yield. I am very familiar with this bill. It was heard I believe once or twice by the good senator from Barragata. And the gentleman had visited my office who was requesting for this. And I assured him that I would work with the committee, but only after concerns were addressed. Now, I know that the author has mentioned, and I'm going through the committee report, I haven't seen it yet, that the issue surrounding the possible adequate water pressure was addressed, but I don't see the issue that has been brought to my attention about EPA. And I believe this property may, and we'll get the answer, I guess, from the author, may be on a septic system. And so, of course, having been the former land management director and having received the comments from the Application Review Committee, which consists of all regulatory agencies, including EPA, in order to feel comfortable on this bill, Madam Speaker, I would see if the author would yield to whether or not the EPA has recommended to pass on this particular legislation.
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Madam Speaker, I don't mind yielding to that, but my answer to that question is I don't have an answer to that with EPA. I'm not familiar with EPA having major concerns regarding that. I know that the government agencies have been working together, and the only problem I had, even when this was being dealt in the last legislature, which was the 31st Guam Legislature, was the issue of compliance on not having enough pressure, water pressure, but I'm not aware of them having any problems on the septic tank. I do know that Mr. Cruz and his family have been working with the different government agencies, and he shared with me most recently that everybody has cleared it, and he's taken the opportunity to also speak to a lot of our colleagues in this body to saying that that was addressed. So if there's anything coming from EPA, I'm not aware of it. Not at this time.
Sure. So, yeah, Madam Speaker, so I just want to put it on the record then, that I think that of the ARC, that's the most critical agency, simply because of the fact that we're talking about a subdivision, our water lens, all the other issues with regard to that. So I just want to be on the record stating that I have reservations, and I believe that we should get a letter from EPA clearing this, just to ensure if it is on a septic system that it would not impede, and it can control the volume of the proposed, the proposal that the bill contains, Madam Speaker. So I just want to be on the record stating that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And Senator, on page 5 of the committee report, when you said you were looking, is that Mr. Cruz did say that he's never gotten support by Land Management, EPA, and Water Works.
So then that would further support, Madam Speaker, my issue, and that, if he had the other clearances, that's fine, but, and I do understand, that this has been done a number of times, but that's why I know that of most of the recommendations that I've ever reviewed, it was always EPA that was the one that stood out the most in terms of the approval, and that's, and if it was on the sewer system, I don't think that they would have a problem with it. I believe this might contain septic, which is a volume issue, Madam Speaker, so I raise that concern. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And also, Senator, in the report on page 4, he said that a sewer line is not available in that area, but the mayor stated that later on, they would all hook up on that sewer line. So, but I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. On the motions, any other speakers? Speaker Ben, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are certainly issues involved with regards to this rezoning proposal, Madam Speaker. I think that Mr. Cruz had gone to the Guam Land Use Commission, and there were concerns aired and that resulted in a non-approval of the request for the rezoning. And what occurred is that after that non-approval, Mr. Cruz decided that he was going to construct anyway. So what he did was he constructed additional units or additional rooms and facilities that now provide him a duplex instead of a single-family house. And so what is occurring is that, and I was very curious because originally this was presented before the committee, and it was to ensure that, to make him conforming so that he can refinance or allow him access to the equity he has built, even though that the facilities he built was not in compliance with the zoning code, and was a problem with regards to being serviced by the available water pressure and sewer facilities. But regardless of that, of course, again, what this would do, and what was originally asked for and requested, was that could we do something that would allow him to make it legal and non-conforming, or conform to the zoning code by allowing a duplex to exist by changing it to an R2. And so we had offered him, for example, a conditional use designation on the R1 lot would allow a duplex to exist on an R1 lot under the conditional use designation, and allow him to then legally access the equity he has built into the units, even though they were done outside of the appropriate building code and licensing requirement. And then Mr. Cruz came back and goes, no, I really don't want to do that. I want to build more units. And so that's when the committee kind of slowed the process down to get a full view of what his intentions are. And so it's difficult to oppose or support this given his situation. I would like to be able to support him to maybe go ahead and give him an R2, but not require any additional construction to occur beyond the existing units there. Because EPA has expressed a concern that any additional units, given the lack of a sewer, poses a threat to the safety and health of the surrounding neighborhood because of the size of the septic tank that would be needed and the leaching field and the size of the lot that would be needed to service any additional units. So we've been trying to work with Mr. Cruz and trying to find a compromise that would allow him, even though he has gone outside the law, that would have allowed him to unlock the equity he has in there with the additional construction that he had done. But he has indicated that that's not enough, and that he really wants an R2 so that if he decides he wants to build more units in the future, he's able to do so. And there may be a limitation in that respect, in that he will not be able to be granted any building permit to build additional units, but that didn't stop him in the first place when he built the additional unit, even though he wasn't granted a building permit and he wasn't granted permission and he was advised not to do so. He still went ahead and did it. So it really is a dilemma for some of us here who try to help our local residents, our small entrepreneurs who get into these 1 or 2 unit rentals to try and assist them in doing so. But when they want to go beyond that without following the rules and the regulations and the laws, quite frankly, in this instance, then we have to just kind of slow the process down and see where we want to go. So I support Mr. Cruz's efforts. I empathize with him in that he has equity, but he can't access it because the banks won't give it to him, because he had built things out of conformance and without the required permits and so forth. And if we were to at least allow him that by saying, you're restricted to this unit, we could have done that with a conditional designation under R1 instead of changing it into an R2, but he's insisting on an R2, Madam Speaker. So that's just some background that we've dealt with this gentleman and our attempt out of the committee to try and assist him and provide him alternatives that would allow him some measure of ability to access what he has invested in the property in the construction of additional units over and beyond what he was authorized to do so. Thank you, and Sidusmasi, Madam Speaker.
Welcome, Mr. Speaker. Any others who would like to speak? There being none, Senator Munya Barnes to close.
Sí, Dios más, sí, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleagues for sharing their info and their history behind this. As when this came to my office, I guess I was the senator trying to see what I could do to see what we can afford Mr. Cruz's needs and his family needs. And he shared with us that he's received the required approvals to continue the renovations of his second floor unit and the permits that have been obtained. But in order for him to move forward, he would have to have the lot to a multiple family dwelling so that he can access the equity that this building would that needs to be provided and what he desires to have. So again, just based on the information received, I ask my colleagues if they can support me in these efforts, and I ask that it be moved to the third reading.
On the motion to send to third reading file, no objections, so ordered. Okay. Bill 61, Senator Tomata, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Bill 61-32 COR into the third reading, and I would like to discuss it.
You may proceed. And that's just as introduced, Senator, then I want to make sure.
As
There's no substitute. I'm looking to see.
actually, it's as introduced, and there is an attachment A to this.
Okay, yes, I got the A. I saw the A.
Okay.
So it's just as introduced.
As introduced, correct.
Yes, okay.
Madam Speaker, in just introducing this bill here, I want to just kind of lay the groundwork for the bill. And first of all, when we take a look at the Guam Tropical Energy Code, I think the first question we need to answer is, what is the goal of the Guam Tropical Energy Code? And basically, the goal of the Energy Code is to reduce the demand for electrical energy. And by reducing our reliance on, or by reducing the demand, we can then further reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuels for energy production. Now, right now, there's an active effort going on to reduce the burning or the production of electrical energy using fossil fuels through the promotion of renewable energy, such as solar panels, windmills, and other alternatives. But that's addressing that issue on the supply side. So what the Energy Code does is it addresses the issue of energy demand from the basically from the demand side of the equation. Now, it's important that we reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuel when we take a look at the fact that the Guam Power Authority imports approximately $300 million worth of fuel annually to meet its production demands. And that's $300 million that basically leaves the economy and is not available for use within our economy. Also, reducing our dependence on imported fossil fuel is consistent with the mandates of Public Law 29-62, which mandates the reduction of the annual net sales of electrical energy produced by burning fossil fuel. Additionally, by reducing the production of energy using fossil fuels, we certainly will make our contribution in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is a major factor in the climate changes affecting our environment. And finally, having basically an approved energy code enables Guam to receive energy-related federal grants. A requirement of most of these grants is that Guam has or soon will have an energy conservation code. Now, how do we achieve then the goal of reducing energy demand? The Guam Renewable Energy Association asserts that the core foundation of energy independence should always start with energy efficiency in any facility or building. So it's almost like if we don't have properly built structures, then it's like pouring water into a leaking bucket. And buildings is really the place, our structures, our homes, our commercial buildings is where we want to apply these standards to, because buildings account for approximately 30% of overall energy consumption. The bulk of building energy use is for air conditioning. Lighting and hot water are also major contributors to power consumption. Containing energy production growth also makes earlier retirement of older, inefficient power generation equipment possible. And an effective energy code is critical to achieving a reduction in energy demand. Energy conservation codes are in use or adopted in 42 states, the District of Columbia, and most U.S. territories, namely the CNMI, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Now, just a real quick background in how we came about with this Guam Tropical Energy Code. The energy code that is currently in use in Guam was developed and implemented in the year 2000. It was prepared for Guam and American Samoa and was funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. And that particular code was based on a 1989 standard of the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers. And they basically they took that standard and modified it for tropical environments. In December of 2011, the Guam Energy Code Task Force was formed, and it held its first meeting. And the task force met regularly to update the energy code, that energy code of 2000. I'm sorry, another energy code that was developed in the year 2009. The task force was an all-volunteer collaborative effort that involved mechanical and electrical engineers, building contractors, architects, realtors, and representatives from DPW and the University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability. The Guam Tropical Energy Code can be considered to be a consensus document. And the task force started its work by taking the 2009 Model Tropical Energy Code, again another piece of work that was funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and they developed a model code for Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. But Guam did not want to basically just adopt wholesale that model energy code. Instead, the task force wanted to make this thing basically a code that is solely focused on Guam's environment. And so in the development then of what came out of this was the 2012 energy code, which is what I'm proposing we adopt. 6 public hearings were held during the period May 2012 to February 2013 to provide the public opportunities to comment and provide feedback on the code development. The formal meetings were all publicly advertised in local newspapers, specifically listing the energy code to be discussed with at least 5 days and 48 hours notice as per Guam law. In all the hearings, changes were recommended, but nobody ever recommended that the energy code should not be implemented. Feedback provided by the public was reviewed, and often changes were made. Changes were then provided to the persons making the recommendations for their consensus. The task force made a significant effort to make this code a fair and reasonable standard. So that basically is the background as to then the effort that went into developing this energy code. I will go ahead and stop at this point and allow my colleagues to raise whatever points or concerns that they may have, and then I will like to close after that. Thank you.
On the motion, Senator Dueñas.
Introduce motion, Madam Speaker, to rise in support of Bill 224-32 COR. Madam Speaker, I did attend and also read through a number of documents and reports from, as the author said, a number of public hearings. And I noted that, of course, the Guam Renewable Association came out in full support. There was some objections, understandable, due to the proposed cost, perhaps at times from time to time. But I noted even during the hearing, the chairman mentioned, the author mentioned, that this would be a prospective endeavor, meaning that it can be prepared for. Madam Speaker, I have a similar measure, or a measure that wants to do a similar thing with regard to reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, creating new industries or supporting new industries such as fully electrical vehicles and the like, and I've substituted that bill and to the committee. Madam Speaker, hopefully we'll have it in this session heard. Madam Speaker, I think that the one thing that I was most interested in not only going through and listening to the discussion on the proposal of Bill 224 was the number of those now who have established themselves in the renewable market. Once again, as I said with my bill introduction of 203, I had a number of visitors at my office to discuss all of the potentials that exist on Guam now. And Madam Speaker, as your bill recently passed for DOE to provide, and I know there's a lot of efforts at GCC now with regard to their efforts in moving forward in green technology and the like. You know, Madam Speaker, it was noted that, and with the one company in particular, that there's aggressive financing schemes now in place to assist, and this is a model that exists very prominently in Hawaii and other jurisdictions, where because it's very cost prohibitive at the front side to augment your power system with renewables, because of the new financing schemes and the opportunities to amortize those over the long run and also realize the savings, Madam Speaker, as one of the key financing opportunities, is really something that this code lends to and opens the door and sets a standard by which a lot of these investment opportunities are going to come forward. Madam Speaker, even recently Guam Housing visited my office, and there's legislation being worked on with regard to affordable housing and making sure that they have opportunities even at their level of affordability, because affordable housing, especially in some of the models that the housing folks are putting forward, there are some opportunities even 80,000, sometimes 50,000 for affordable housing. Could you imagine those same units having a power bill equivalent to the mortgage? It just simply doesn't make sense. So having a code, having something which sets the standard, knowing that all of these opportunities, Madam Speaker, across the board are coming online, and not slowly, faster than we might think, that is high time that we have a code in place that sets that standard, and that a lot of the answers to the equation that was brought forward in terms of affordability are being answered. So, Madam Speaker, one more thing just in closing. One of the individuals that called my office and provided support on the full electric vehicles is completely off the power grid in her home, and she bought a Nissan Leaf from Nissan, which means she basically doesn't pay any power, doesn't pay for any fuel. So she's 100% renewable in terms of her ability to sustain her home and also to sustain her needs for transportation. So that's how fast, Madam Speaker, things are moving, and I think it's high time that we have a code in place and continue this progressive effort to fast-track Guam, as we're the perfect place, really, in the middle of this region right now, to be a leader in green technology, to be a leader in renewables, and to be a leader when it comes to making sure that our government has the compliance requirements to ensure that all possible issues are mitigated when it comes to the standards that have to be set to do that, not only in our homes, but at a commercial level and throughout our government. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to rise in full support of 224-32 COR.
You're welcome. Senator Ed.D.
Madam Speaker, I just know, the copy of Bill 61 that was passed out was just the bill. It did not have the attachment A, except maybe for those who have copies of the committee report.
Okay, I understand they're having it printed, so we'll take a brief recess.
And also a correction, I had, Senator Tom had his other bill in front of me, and I was speaking prior on Bill 61. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, so we're going to take a brief recess.
I pulled this up a little bit. Well, back on the record. Senator, when you want, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that I'm here to stand and rise in support of this Bill 61, and I just have an inquiry to the author of the legislation as it relates to timelines. Of course, if this tropical energy code gets passed and legislated into law, I know that there will be some time that's going to be needed for a lot of the vendors and the companies to make sure they change out their products and supplies. I know that the majority of those who came to the public hearing shared their letter and their testimony of support. But I wanted, as I was looking at the bill, I saw a timeline of 6 months, and I wanted to see, to ask the author if that was sufficient time to have all these, the organizations and the realtors and those in the construction company and the vendors that sell these energy supplies, that would they have enough time to turn around their supplies?
Do you yield, Senator?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Actually, the 6 months was deemed to be satisfactory, and there was no objections raised to that timeline. They felt that was sufficient to, of course, clear the shelves of, for example, air conditioning units that are below 65,000 BTU and that do not meet the 13 SEER minimum efficiency rating. So it is hoped that 6 months would be enough to clear those stocks, and also 6 months would be sufficient for plans that are currently under development and are going through the process of getting checked to actually get through the gate and basically be approved based on whatever existing codes they were developed on.
Is that satisfactory?
Yes, it is, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to say thank you to the author for sharing that answer, and also note for the record that I will stand and rise in support of this Bill 61, Santa Masi.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy, of course, that we're going to have a tropical, efficiency plan, something more relevant to us here in Guam. And I thank, of course, the author for answering that 6-month question, because I too was concerned that, will the vendors be able to, and I really don't know that, is that they've purchased a lot of these equipment, and now once they've purchased it, then, to get rid of it in 6 months, that would be considered then a loss for them. I don't think they have these equipment, so to speak, and consignments. I don't know, I'm not a businesswoman in that respect to be able to do that. There's just some other things that I was looking at as I was trying to read, do some speed reading to see the different requirements now. And it's not just, so the question would be, yes, you're right, so it's also for individual family residential dwellings and for commercial buildings and other businesses? Can Senator let us?
Do you yield, Senator Abbott?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do. Actually, if you take a look at the energy code itself, you'll see there on the table of contents on page, first of all, to answer the question, the code will apply to all residential and non-residential buildings. However, in your low-rise residential buildings, it recognizes that there may be some homeowners who are going to use natural ventilation. So they're not going to be required to, of course, the requirements for air conditioning will not apply. But they will still be required, for example, so that we can reduce the energy that's consumed for lighting, that they conform to certain window dimensions to allow sufficient light to come in. And then there'll also be standards set for water heating. So those will still apply to both your residential and non-residential. On top of that, it will apply prospectively. So it will apply to all new buildings, and it will apply to renovations that exceed a certain threshold, just as, for example, the building code. Whatever buildings are in place, they don't have to do a retrofit to comply with a new building code. But when they then undertake major renovation or a change of occupancy, then the new codes will then at that time kick in.
Is that satisfactory, Madam Speaker?
Yes, thank you for that, because you're right. I read that portion where it says major alterations to a building where the estimated cost of construction is more than 50% of the appraised value of the building, then of course all of these would be required. The other question though that I have, that would be, let's say, new construction, and yes, there's that requirement for window, size of window, for adequate lighting and all that, but if the building is not concrete, would all these be applicable as well? All these requirements be applicable to a like tin roof building, wood frame, building? Would that be applicable as well?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. First of all, to construct the building, it's got to meet the building codes. So, whether it be concrete or wooden structure, it's got to meet those building codes. Now, the objective of the energy code is really to prevent leakage of, for example, the conditioned air that's inside the building from leaking out, or to prevent the hot, humid air from the outside to infiltrate the house and cause the air conditioning system, for example, to work even harder. And so in the code, it talks about how the requirements where they need to properly put caulking or sealing between joints, and they even specify, for example, where your pipes come in, those have to be caulked. The windows have to be able to meet certain closure standards. It's certainly not rocket science, and these things are available on the market. It's just that by prescribing then this code, it really provides a standard as to here's how we want our homes to be constructed, and it will apply whether it's a concrete building or a wooden building. And of course, the building's going to have to meet the building codes.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing for my questions to be answered. And I think there are things like this that it's important for the listening audience to have a better understanding of it, because as I go through it, like for example, if they don't know, then I'm just saying to myself, roof surfaces shall have a minimum slope of 1/4 inch per foot of run. So that I picked up naturally, because I thought that is interesting, rather than what we have been building as a result of typhoons, is to have flat roofs, and you end up with like a box system. And then the water heating system shall be certified Energy Star compliant. I think that these things are really great, and I'm glad that they're for new buildings, existing buildings. As much as a lot of people would like to be able to do this, it is going to be costly for them to slowly get into purchasing Energy Star compliant equipment. Even to the point that, of course, it's going to cause us to conserve water, where it talks about shower heads and lavatories that should be labeled in terms of meeting, the plumbing code. That is good, and I think our people are starting to do that. The other question that I have, and I know people have the senators indicated that in the public hearings, no one has really objected to the implementation and moving forward with this plan. But one of the biggest, I would think, that will be affected would be hotel and motel rooms. All of the requirements for window, lighting, of course, piping in existing buildings, so those guys would be, so to speak, grandfathered unless, of course, 50% again of any type of renovations to be done, that then, of course, they would have to make the switch over. Is that correct then? Am I correct in saying that is the case?
That's correct. So the existing buildings, this code, they don't have to do any retrofitting to come into compliance with this code. But when they undertake major renovations, then, and I think that's defined, based on value or whatever, however it's defined. But that, at that time, is then when they need to come into compliance.
Thank you. And I'm not sure. I know it's a tropical code, but in their tables, a lot of it is references are being made to the British thermal unit for most of the charts. Is that the acceptable international code then that we're making reference to, and that is also then relevant to a tropical area?
Mr. Speaker, of course, for example, air conditioning units, there are always, the unit of measure is the British thermal unit. Now, keep in mind that the standards that were used to develop this code was taken from the American Society of Heating, heating, air conditioning, and something engineers. So the American engineers they understand it. They understand what the BTU stands for.
Thank you. And one last question then is that because these are all going to be the new requirements now for anyone who's building new, was a discussion actually had in terms of just like taking an individual home right now, what that additional cost would be versus what we have today? What would it be for, a commercial building for that matter? Just a rough estimate. Is it by percentage? Is it a 50% increase, 10% increase? Just like to have an idea of what it is that we can expect as a result of the implementation, passing and implementing this tropical, energy code.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have the data in front of me, but I'm aware that there was a study that was done in 1997, which basically took a look at, and as a result of that study, it did show that yes, at the front end, it's going to add to that initial cost of construction, but they found they've come to the conclusion that the payback period for what normally additional investment is needed to come into compliance with the energy code is about 1.3 years for the payback. And of course, that's assuming that the minimum, this code establishes the minimum standards. Now, I know, for example, we have a developer in Tumon who was on the radio frequently, who was saying that, the code only requires that he puts up windows that can withstand 150 miles per hour of wind. Well, he put up 250 miles, windows that could withstand 250 miles. Well, obviously, his initial costs are going to be a lot higher, but I'm sure that, the benefits of putting in that level of improvement certainly would be, would manifest itself. But now this payback is calculated on the fact that today we find, for example, the roof coating material. Today, the cost per square foot of what's being sold on the market is about the same, but the reflective quality of the material is twice as good. The fact that the cost of electricity has gone up considerably, you're certainly gonna, that's that much more you're gonna reduce. It's gonna reduce the cost of maintenance of the air conditioning units because the runtime is not gonna be as long. It doesn't have to work as hard because we're trapping a lot of the conditioned air inside. So 1.3 years was basically on average what the payback period was estimated to be. And that's if you put in the just meet the minimum standards.
Is that satisfactory, Madam?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator Tommy Morrison. Anybody after Senator Morrison? Thank you. Senator Morrison, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just, with the author will yield, I just have a few concerns to address.
Senator, go ahead.
I take it or that when the Guam Tropical Energy Code is adopted, and of course, the previous speaker brought up that the 6-month transition would be in place. I looked here and I see that in the input from the attachment that just provided, that there was contractors, real estate professionals, engineers, architects, and the general public were part of these hearings and providing input. My concern I have, if the author could clear this up, is obviously when this building code is adopted, there will be definitely a domino effect with the Department of Public Works, the contractor's licensing board, as far as examinations with general contractor's license and general engineers and all the specialty classifications that follow line. So my question is were these bodies aware, or when this goes into effect, that those examination processes will reflect the building code within their examination process?
Yes, in fact, I do know that GCC has already held a number of workshops and also plans to develop an entire curriculum around the Guam tropical energy and the green industry. The Guam Energy Office also has funds and will be funding additional workshops once the code gets adopted, and has also conducted workshops, a couple of workshops previously. The Guam Building Code Council, which is your body of engineers and realtors, and basically the same folks that will be that I certainly have a vested interest in this energy code, will also be funding workshops. DPW has assured that DPW themselves has assured that it will be ready and has already had 2 workshops on energy codes and will hold more. And so I think the stakeholders are leaning forward in anticipation of the adoption of this energy code so that we can get it implemented.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, are there any speakers? There being none, Senator Adda, would you like to close?
I just want to just go ahead then and just take a moment to just kind of briefly summarize then and answer the question of what is it that the Tropical Energy Code prescribes. And So first of all, the Tropical Energy Code provides engineers, designers, builders, building owners, the basic guideline on how an energy-efficient building should be constructed and the materials needed to sustain efficient operations of the facilities. So, when we go to the hardware store and we're going to buy the heat-reflecting coating for our roof, how do I know that this one is a good heat-reflecting material? Maybe one way I can then, assure myself is go to the energy code and says, you should have at least a minimum rating of whatever for that heat-reflecting material. It prescribes certain requirements for lighting controls to better control the use and to maximize the use of natural daylight. However, these lighting requirements are not imposed on single-family residential homes. So you'll find in the code that Section 7 of the code is not applicable to single-family homes. But when you go into, for example, Section 5, which deals with ventilation, it will specify in there that windows should be of a certain dimension. The code will require that energy-efficient products be used. So 6 months from now, we should not be finding in the hardware stores air conditioners for, let's say, the 24,000 BTU split unit air conditioners that we use in our homes. We should not be finding anything lower than the 13 SEER rated air conditioning unit. It will impact, the code will impact all new buildings and major renovations, and commercial buildings in particular. So it would have a limited impact on low-rise residential buildings, and it allows for naturally ventilated low-rise residential buildings by recognizing the desire for homeowners to not have air conditioning. During the discussions, the question came up, what if I'm just building a shed in the back and am I going to have to comply with all these things again? I'm not going to be living in it. I'm going to be storing things, and the code actually recognizes and it exempts. I think it's called the unconditioned structures. So it's structures that are not meant. You weren't going to put an air conditioner into it. You're just going to use it as a storage shed. While there may be modest initial costs for energy efficiency improvements, it will be more than paid back through lower energy and home maintenance bills. With that, Madam Speaker, I will close, and I hope that I've answered the questions that my colleagues may have had, and ask that they favorably consider Bill 61, the Guam Tropical Energy Code. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senators. On the motion to send Bill 61-32 to the third reading file, with no objection, so ordered. Bill number 70-32, Senator Anthony Adel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to move Bill 70-32 to the third reading file. I'd like to speak in the motion, please.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 70-32 is an act to add a new Article 8 to Chapter 32 of 5 GCA, and this is relative to gift cards and gift certificates. What this bill does, Madam Speaker, is that it implements the gift card provisions of the Credit Card Accountability, Responsibility, and Disclosure Act of the Eco Gift Card Act. And it applies to electronic gifts. The most significant part of this provision is that the federal law provides a 5-year expiration date on gift cards. And what Bill 7032 does is that it will extend that provision of the federal law to apply to paper gift certificates. What this bill doesn't do is that the provisions will not apply to gratuitous or promotional gift cards or certificates that were not paid for. And as you know, Madam Speaker, many people go out and buy gift certificates for birthdays or Christmas and things like that. And when you notice, you'll see an expiration date no longer than 90 days after the date it was purchased. And a lot of these gift cards or the gift certificates, for one reason or another, gets placed in the cabinet and they forget about it, and by the time they see it and realize 90 days have went by. And it's these things that where you want to be able to give the person who purchased that or who received that gift card the opportunity to use it. And what we want to do is that ensure that all those that purchase gift cards or gift certificates will be able to use it within that 5-year period. You know, when the person goes in and they buy a gift certificate, there's no expiration date on our dollar bills. So I think a 5-year window, a 5-year period for when you can redeem your gift certificate is very reasonable in the end. As in the case with federal law, all state gift cards, phone cards are exempt from the provision of the bill. Phone companies have continuous charges that they must pay and maintain a service for the phone account. And what the FCC did was they requested the exemption from the federal law and the states so that they have, and states that have implemented the gift card laws to ensure that the phone companies get a steady stream of revenues to maintain the service. Most phone carriers allow customers to keep their minutes, and as long as they keep recharging it every 30 days, you know, they'll be able to use it. And I just, the gift card, it's really important, Madam Speaker. This Christmas has went by. You know, we don't know how many gift cards were sold out there and how many people hasn't used it yet. Hopefully they go into their cabinets today and start looking for it and get it out before the 90 days comes up. But there are companies here on Guam that actually don't have any expiration date. If you look at Tony Roma's or Capricciosa and you buy a gift card or a gift certificate from there, it says open. So you can go back anytime you feel like and redeem your gift card. So I hope I'll be able to get my colleagues' support on Bill 7032, and I look forward for their favorable consideration. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator. Anyone like to speak? I have a question. I have a question, but I'm up here, so center speaker.
Speaker Wampat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support this bill, and it's long overdue, of course. And I really want to make sure that this is successful. But I do have a question, though, two questions actually. Who will, enforce this, and if it's not actually happening, because I know it says that it'll be effective immediately, and I'm sure that there are going to be some businesses out there who may not hear of this, and if they don't know, of course, ignorance of the law is no excuse. But who will enforce this, and how do the consumers, if they do go to a place and they're told, "I'm sorry, it's expired, that's it," where do they go to report this as well?
Will the minority leader yield to the question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. They can go to the Attorney General's office, the Office of Consumer Protection, that I believe they can be able to resolve that issue, or that they would have with any gift certificates or gift cards that they find in question.
Thank you for that question. Of course, this may not even be relevant to this, but something actually to think about, because I've been approached by individuals on this matter, is that purchases, when they make purchases, the complaint is that they're being told by the sales clerk or even the owner that no matter what it is, I mean, that all of your purchases are final and that there can't be any refunds. And other places, of course, they're really good about it, maybe the bigger companies, but there are these others, the smaller ones, I guess, that are just saying that all sales are final, you can't get your money back, even if you just purchase it and then in a day you return it, you can't do that. You must buy something equivalent to get an exchange, but you surely cannot get your money back. And I don't know whether, of course, this is relevant, but I know that the senator has been doing a lot of work, on this, as similar to, of course, not a gift certificate, but it's, cash paid, and yet, you can't do anything about it. So, and that's something to think about. If the senator has, any comments to this, I think it'd be great to maybe take this discussion even further. It may not be appropriate here, but surely something that I'm sure every single individual, has encountered that problem as well. Thank you very much. Senator, do you have anything?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Any other senator wishing to speak on Bill 70? If not, Senator, would you like to close? Okay. On the motion to place Bill 70-32 in the third reading file, no objections to order. The next bill on the agenda, Bill 130-32, Senator Tom Adda. Okay. 130, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move Bill 130-32 as substituted by the author to the third reading, and I'd like to discuss it.
On the motion, with some objections, no objections, you may proceed. You may proceed the discussion on the bill, I'm sorry. You may proceed, 130.
Okay.
You're discussing Bill 130, right? So you made the motion to move over
I'm
to
sorry, all I heard was
transitioning
Senator
here.
Adda.
Oh, Senator Tom Adda.
Did you have another bill? So did you mean that, Senator Adda? Bill 71?
No, you. I was addressing you. 130, yeah, and I was addressing your motion to place your Bill 130 on the third reading file with some discussion.
Okay.
So I said with some discussion, you may proceed.
Oh, with some
apologize.
discussion. I thought I heard you say with some objection.
Oh, no. We're transitioning here also, so I'm sorry. Yeah, you may proceed. You are Senator Adda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill 130-32 basically addresses a situation that we have locally, and really the intent of the bill is that we do everything that we can to protect the scarce jobs that we have for our residents. And so what's happening is that we have many alien laborers who basically overstay. And so what happens is the law-abiding employer, when their time expires, they take them up to the airport, they drop them off, the laborer goes in one door and he goes out another door, and there's somebody waiting for them on the other door to take them. And so these people then end up at various work sites, job sites, and will basically take jobs for pennies on the dollar. And our residents who may be just as qualified to take that job, of course will not accept a job that's paying only pennies on the dollar. So the situation that we have is that our Guam Department of Labor, the powers that it has with respect to alien labor is that it can go onto a job site to investigate as the way the law reads it, the condition of aliens relative to their employment. So they go in there and they can say, take a look at their living conditions, take a look as to whether these guys are being worked 12 hours a day and with a 15-minute lunch or things like that. But they do not, but if they go on a job site, and they, they go up and ask one of the laborers, can I see some identification? The guy can just say, don't bother me, and he walks off, and our Department of Labor investigators can't do anything about it. They don't have the authority to arrest and prosecute aliens because that power rests with the U.S. Department of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So, but what happens is our local Department of Labor works collaboratively with the federal immigration, and they will go on a job site, and they'll make their inspections. And if the feds find a laborer who basically does not have the authorization to be working on Guam, they would arrest him. So when they arrest him, what happens to him then? The feds either detain him until he can get a time to go before a immigration judge, or what happens, and what has been happening, is that somebody will come and bail out these guys until their time comes up to appear before the judge. And the judge is in Hawaii. And so, but what happens then is that could take months. It could even take years before they appear before a judge to be adjudicated, to in fact determine that you've overstayed. We're going to put you on an airplane and send you back. So for those guys who then are fortunate enough to be bailed out, these are the guys that will end up getting, back out on the job sites. Now, so of course what's happening is you may have employers out there who would willingly take these guys on the job site to do work for them, and it's really no skin off their nose, because right now there's no penalty for them if they are caught. Although the federal government, federal immigration, does have laws which prohibit employers from hiring workers who have an illegal status. But, let's face it, our priorities and the federal government's priorities are not always the same. They really could care if this job site is employing all illegal aliens. And so we need to address that. And I think that Bill 130 then will provide our Department of Labor with that ability to go in there and check on and to then amend their current authority to investigate the condition or the status of aliens relative to their employment. So by making that simple amendment on page 2 there, section 2, what happens then is that Department of Labor investigator can come up and say, sir, may I please see your ID card or something that shows that you have the legal authority to be working here. If we find out that, in fact, that individual does not have a legal status, then what would happen is the Department of Labor investigator will issue a citation to the employer of that illegal worker. It could be the construction company, and the bill even goes in and says, okay, maybe he's just there hiring himself out. So then somebody eventually, the way the bill is written, somebody eventually has got to be responsible for this guy. And so what the bill does is then it will impose fines because on that employer for violating employment laws. And so sanctions will be put on his business license. So for the first offense, the employer shall be subject to a license sanction fee of $1,000 per worker without lawful status found to be employed at the work site inspected, and suspension of the employer's license to do business on Guam may be recommended. And if we find it may be cheaper, to go ahead and pay that $1,000 fine, and go ahead and hire more illegals, the second offense would be $2,000 per worker. The third offense would be basically the punishment gets stiffer. The whole point is that we've got to provide a disincentive to employers from, hiring these cheap laborers at the expense of our workers who are residing on Guam and are here looking for employment. That, Madam Speaker, is the overview of Bill 130.
On the motion? Anybody would like to speak on the motion? Senator Muñoz Barnes?
Madam Speaker, I don't have a problem with this bill. I just want to ask the author of the legislation, as we look at the authorization of Department of Labor to come in and do the investigations at the site instructions, the site place, is there already authorization to be given that's already in the books today that gives Department of Labor to go up to the construction site?
Yes, and that's, if you look in Section 2, actually, Section 1106K of Chapter 1, Title 22, currently authorizes Department of Labor to go and investigate the condition of aliens, okay? But it doesn't give them the authority to go and investigate the status, to go up to that worker and say, sir, can you show me your I-9 or whatever documentation?
Okay, Mr. Speaker, the reason why I asked that question is because of it's the federal law and the requirements that immigration do the investigation to see if the employee has the sufficient documentation. I was wondering, wouldn't it be able for them to at least go through the employer first and ask for the detailed records of all the employees and seeing if there's sufficient documentation there? Because one would probably assume that it would be harassing the employees at the work site. I'm just asking, does that happen already?
Well, that's certainly an option, and in the discussions, I share the same concern that you have, that, we don't have these investigators going into the work site and disrupting the activity because, the guy is about ready to hammer away and the investigator comes up and says, stop, show me your ID card. They're very careful about doing that, but they also know that these guys are smart enough that they know who the investigators are, and as soon as they come into a job site, poof, they're gone. So they're careful about disrupting the work activity.
Thank you.
Is that satisfactory?
Well, yeah, it's satisfactory. I just think that procedure should be done first, and then if there's any violation, so the onus would be upon the employer, and because it's really hard to get on the employees, as some of them don't even understand the language, the English language. So I'm just saying, making sure that there are protocols in place to have the investigator look at the proper documentation of the employer first. So,
Thank you.
just my thoughts.
Madam Speaker?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was trying to read, of course, to find and follow from the original bill, from testimonies also from Mr. Cruz, and then what the substituted version is by the author. And I noticed that, and I realized that the reason for all this, and at the very beginning, of course, it opens up with that, they shall, the employers shall ensure that all alien workers at the job site, of course, have valid government identification. And then now the director, who is authorized then to, or his representative that go in the job site, then may request for the documents. And I understand that as well, because then you don't want to stop the work, you want it to continue to go on. But after that period of time, and then there is an offense, this is where now I am kind of puzzled, is that it says that the employer shall then, of course, be subject to that $1,000 fee per worker. However, it says there that then the inspector will may recommend, action to be taken, and that's on the first. And then the second, there shall be a sanction of $2,000, but then again, the director may refer the matter for some action. And then when you get to the third offense, then that's when it says now it shall. And, and I'm wondering is that, maybe we may not need to reach the third level and just make it a requirement that this be sent, not so much that the director wants they want some action, but rather than to just say may, then it just gets passed on, and they continue to violate it until, months later, when then, we're going to say that now they shall then suspend or revoke their license. So I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Maybe the author can explain why it has changed then from shall in the beginning to now may. Was there something that I missed on the testimony during the public hearing? Because I was reading Mr. Cruz's testimony, and sure, he just said that why we're doing this here locally, but it's important that we do it here locally because it's not being done federally, but we have to protect, our workers here as well. So would the author then be ready to
Senator,
answer
did
the
you yield?
question?
Yes, I will, Mr. Speaker. The whole idea behind this is, the graduated penalty concept, basically. First time we catch you, we're going to, hit your pocketbook. So if he's got 5 illegal workers, that's $5,000 that he's going to have to pay out. And, I think we want to give ourselves that wiggle room that it may be that the employer, for some reason, really did not know or whatever. But you want to give yourself that wiggle room, because if we say you shall pay the $1,000 and the Department of Labor shall recommend to the business license up at Rev and Tax to suspend the license, well, there may be circumstances that does not warrant that level of penalizing. So, sure, the first time catches attention with a monetary penalty. Second time, more monetary penalty. And the third time, obviously, this guy is just incorrigible. And so just, shut him down. Because we also got to think about the fact that if we suspend his license, that may mean putting some workers out of a job. So I think the graduated penalty is needed here.
Is that satisfactory, Madam Speaker?
Yes, and of course, yes, I understand. And, we can definitely increase some of the monies that we want to send to the Department of Labor by fining and then ultimately revoking. So, I understand that. The other is on page 5 on section 3, authorization to adopt. However, the Department of Labor may adopt, and I'm just thinking that this is serious enough that there should be, that we just don't want to say to them, you may put the rules and regs together rather than saying that they shall, because then now they would have something to follow as they go out then to implement the law. So I don't want to make an amendment to say shall, but I like to hear from the author again as to maybe the may, because are there existing rules and regs, or are we going to just adopt maybe what is in the federal law, or, reasons?
Senator Ed.D., do you wish to yield?
I understand, and I think maybe it may be appropriate to make an amendment that the Department of Labor shall develop and adopt rules and regulations consistent with the AAA process and consistent with the laws of the United States and Guam as may be necessary. So they shall formulate rules that may be necessary to ensure the effectiveness. But again, they do have some rules in place, so the reason why May was put was at least the proponents of the bill felt that the rules that they have in place is really sufficient.
So which one of you is making the amendment?
No, I mean,
Well, if my colleague is adamant that we should make an amendment, then what I suggested.
well, thank you. No, I'm not adamant about this, and he actually, the author basically said that there are existing then rules that will be applicable that, we can continue then to follow. So, and if that is the case, then why am I going to make the amendment to mandate them to say that they shall develop and adopt the rules if there are already existing rules? And my understanding is that there are. So then, but then if that is the case, then why do we even bother to have Section 3? So, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Morrison, then Senator Yamashita, then Senator McCready. No, not yet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of Bill 130. I appreciate the effort of the author and working closely with the Alien Division of Department of Labor, understanding the challenges they go through, relying on their counterparts for many of these efforts to address the violations from many employers out there, contractors specifically, when I was at the Contractors Licensing Board. And of course, not in violating their due process here, as it's clearly stated here in page 2. I also want to note that this clearly gives now the Department of Labor's Alien Division their extended arm of investigation to go around and proceed without relying on their counterparts, such as the Contractors Licensing Board investigating arm and the inspection unit of the Department of Public Works and the Department of Revenue Tax investigation unit. So from the experiences I had with these folks going out there daily trying to crack down on the illegal activity within our construction industry, I appreciate the author's effort to give them the tools necessarily to act immediately on these violations. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the author for crafting this legislation. Thank you.
Senator Yamashita, you recognized?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak on this measure. I stand in support of Bill number 130-32. I really think one of the aspects of this measure is that it actually protects the workers. And I appreciate that because sometimes these people find themselves in situations where they may feel caught. And so I think this will actually help them get untangled if they are tangled. The question I do have, the author will yield, is this is what I understand, is that we're taking some federal authority, and we're going to give it to our Department of Labor at a local level so that they can step in and investigate and take action as needed. And I read how the Office of the Attorney General shall assist in providing advice to the director/hearing officer when matters of law arise. Mr. Speaker, the question I have is that well defined? When you have federal law and you have local law, is that already defined when federal kicks in and works with local?
Do you yield, Senator Adams?
Well, I'm really not, I don't know that I am, but I do know that normally there are federal laws and then we enact local laws that really kind of mirror that, largely because we can't always be waiting for the feds to be the ones enforcing what's going on here. So what's important is that we do not usurp authority that is really vested in just the federal government. So if you take a look, for example, on page 2, on the second, on line 4 there, the second finding, it says very clearly that that federal law says the provisions of this section preempt any state or local law from imposing civil or criminal sanctions other than through licensing and similar laws. And this was tested, I believe it was in Arizona. It was a court case. And so we're not we're not muzzling in on their territory. We're just going in there and asking, are you employing legal workers? And if not, then you're subject to penalty, fines.
To which, Mr. Speaker, I totally support. I'm just trying to understand how we work with them. And I would think that the Attorney General's office has that all worked out. That when something is found at a local level and if it kicks in the federal, then that will occur. I was just trying to clarify that in my mind. I also think, Mr. Speaker, that this really will also help with our human trafficking issue in different levels. So it will strengthen the capability of our Department of Labor to really have the eyes and some authority to further their questioning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Senator McCready, then Senator Tony Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the author of this bill. You know, I rise in full support of Bill number 130. You know, I guess when you just narrow it down, there could be two wrongdoings here, and I may have an amendment to proffer, but one of the wrongdoings would be that you illegally hire a worker and you underpay this worker who's just trying to work hard for his family, but you underpay him and you, to me, commit a crime there. But the second infraction is that you take away a job that could possibly go to somebody who's well-deserving on our island as well. Either way, I think that when you look at the offenses on starting on page 3, the first offense, all I would like to proffer, if the author would yield, would be when we say shall, when we talk about the suspension of the employer's license to business on Guam may be recommended, I would like to maybe take a minute to ask the author if he would even make it more stringent by saying it shall be suspended, your first offense, and it shall be suspended on your second offense, because on our third offense here, we have a revocation of his license immediately. So I just think it kind of falls in line with instead of may, maybe it should say shall, and therefore the penalty is a suspension of license, your first and second, and then you revoke the license completely on your third. So that's my question to the author, to see if he would yield to
I'll take a short recess.
An amendment.
You have to go back to Bill 71.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, thank you for answering the question to the author, and at this point, I will not proffer an amendment and satisfied with the answer.
Thank you very much. Senator Tonietta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like for it if the author would yield to a question on, we're looking at the violations for first offense $1,000 and second offense $2,000. Where would that fine be paid, and then who would that money go to?
Yes, we'll find on page 5, starting at line 11, it says, funds generated from section 1106K2, which is K2 is, section 2 there. So basically then the penalty will go to the Manpower Development Fund. So it shows there on line 12 of page 5 that the funds generated from the penalties shall be deposited into the Department of Labor Manpower Development Fund and expended in accordance with, I don't know off the top of my head what the provisions are of 22 GCA.
So it would be paid at Department of Labor, and
yes,
the fines stay within there.
I believe my colleague said that it's for administrative costs. Right. Some of that Manpower Development Fund goes to GCC also to subsidize their training programs.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator wish to be heard on this bill? If not, I will allow the sponsor to close. On the motion...
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, and I certainly urge my colleagues to favorably consider the bill for two reasons. One, Bill 130 protects the limited jobs that we have on this island for our residents, and two, for those who feel that, the heck with that, I'm going to hire the cheaper laborers, and if they get caught, then they'll get penalized, and that money will then go into a manpower development fund. Part of that is used to subsidize the training at GCC to train our manpower. It certainly has a lot of, and will also provide some funding for that Alien Labor Division to continue its work. that it has been tasked to do. So, thank you very much for listening.
On the motion to send the bill down to the third reading, there being no objection, I understand that everybody wants to get out, but I'd like to just go back, since I passed Senator Tony Ed on Bill 71, to allow him just a minute to move his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move Bill 7132 COR to the third reading and speak on the motion, please.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what Bill 7132 does is it's an act to repeal paragraph 34 of 26203 of Chapter 26 of 11 GCA, and this is relative to business privilege tax exemptions. And what the bill does is that it repeals the boss contractor GRT exemption. The original intent of the exemption was to give the boss contractor, the base operating services contractor, a GRT exemption along with the QC benefits in exchange for employing people affected by the BRAC base closure commission closures. And this exemption was contingent upon the boss contractor contract fulfilling a list of requirements that were tied to the QC law. Section 58128.7 of the QC law was repealed by Public Law 3188. When that section was repealed, the list of conditions that the boss contractor had to fulfill in exchange for the GRT exemption was also repealed. And since the list of conditions that once existed with 58128.7 of 12 GCA no longer exists, it is arguable that the boss contractor can take the GRT exemption without fulfilling any requirements of the QC. So Bill 7032 is just to repeal that section there, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any senator wish to be heard on 71? Any senator wish to be heard on Bill 71? If not, is there an objection to sending the bill down into hearing no objection? The speaker will be resuming, so. All right, without any objection, we'll recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.